Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Your Land and Legacy webinar. And my name is Lamont Garber. I am the Watershed Restoration Coordinator for the Stroud Water Research Center. And we're really looking forward to the next hour. We're going to be providing a lot of information in a fairly short time frame, but we'll also be allowing some time for Q&A. And just want to remind you all, it's there on your screen, but we will be recording this session. And if you would like to review some of this material, it'll be posted on the landownerhelp.com website, probably in another week or so from now. And before we get started with the presentations, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items. First, we'll be ending at 1 o'clock and we'll have a little time for discussion in the last few minutes of the webinar. And so please save your questions to the end. However, Steve Groff, who's got a busy farm to run, he's going to be speaking first. And so we're going to have some built-in discussion time right after Steve is done with his slides. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge our very generous sponsor who's making this all possible, and that's the Chesapeake Bay office of the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. They provide a lot of support for efforts like this, and we just couldn't do it without them. So thank you, NIFWIF. Let me tell you just a bit about Stroud, since we're hosting this session, and you'll find out more about our other partners soon. But Stroud is a freshwater ecology research facility, as well as an education and restoration facility based in Avondale, Pennsylvania, which is just a few minutes west of Philadelphia. We're in Chester County. And our mission, as you can read down there, is to advance the knowledge and stewardship of freshwater systems through global research, education, and watershed restoration. And the reason we're involved in this very important topic of non-operating landowners is that we recognize that if we're only talking with producers, with farmers, we're missing a really, really big and important part of the agriculture sector, and that being landowners who rent out their land to others. And so we're thrilled to be working with these partners here as well as others. There's just a lot of great information out there, and we're going to be sharing that with you this morning or this afternoon. I want to show you the agenda for the day. First off is Steve Groff, who is a farmer, a cover crop expert and coach for other farmers, an author and a speaker. But Steve also runs a farm in Holtwood, Pennsylvania, which is in Lancaster County. So Steve's going to be talking about soil health issues for landowners. After Steve, Sarah Everhart will be leading the discussion, and Sarah is the Senior Research Associate and Legal Specialist of the University of Maryland Carey School of Law. And finally, Lisa Blazure is our Soil Health Coordinator for the Stroud Water Research Center. And she also happens to be the lead coordinator for a new effort in Pennsylvania called the Soil Health Coalition. So she's going to be talking about that as well as other resources in other parts of the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I know we have some viewers in on the Delaware side, the Delaware watershed, as well as some folks from outside Pennsylvania. And so I'd invite you all just to put your name and your where you're from in the chat box if you'd like to. And then finally, I just want to note Jen Nelson, who is another partner with us. She's with Resource Smart LLC, and Jen will be helping with the Q&A. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve Groff.
Well, thank you so much, Lamont. Appreciate it. And I'm just going to go through a couple slides here, a couple bullet points, if you will, dealing with if you're a landowner or you work with people who are landowners and rent their fields out to other farmers. There's just a few things I think will be helpful to know, and it may validate some of your feelings It may also challenge some of your feelings. So there was, just want to go on to the next slide. There was a survey done a couple years ago that asked the question, does it basically is kind of a question of, it does not make sense for me as a farmer now to use cover crops on land that I rent. And when you look at this, it's certainly no clear consensus. You have some that strongly agree and some that strongly disagree, a lot of neutral. So this issue is kind of all over the map, so to speak. So it all depends a lot on the synergy between the goals of the landowner and the farmer. And sometimes there's clear synergy, sometimes there's, you could say, antagonism over soil health issues and so forth. So in the next slide there, I'm going to start going into how to identify landlord's perception of soil health. And there's 3 different categories. Now, the one is those who support soil health. They understand a little bit about it. That's their, they see value in investing in their most valuable asset. It's the soil, the land that they own, and they want someone to be a good steward of it. You understand some of the dynamics of regenerative agriculture and sustainable agriculture and saving the soil and keeping it, and not only just keeping it, but regenerating it. And they also like the compelling story of soil health. That story plays well everywhere you go. The next slide is, kind of the opposite of that. Those who do not support soil health, and it's probably not an intentional thing. It's probably just like, they're just not aware. Or they may just be uncomfortable with something growing in their fields other than a cash crop, planting a cover crop. They may be used to clean, brown fields, no weeds. Sometimes cover crops are almost perceived as being a weed, but just basically it's a lack of understanding of what soil health is. Tradition comes to mind. That's what they're used to seeing. It's what they have in their mind, and they don't want a field that is different than their expectations. And then you have the other third and final landlord category who think it's all about the money. They run their it's an investment. They own this farm, they own this, and they're going to get the highest rent they can out of it. It doesn't really matter other things that as far as soil health. And that is what I would say a short-term view. There's some things that crop up here that tend to be difficult to understand with farmers and tenants in this dynamic now of soil health. So here's an example. A cover cropping tenant plants cover crops for a few years, keeps the soil covered, starting to build up more nutrients and so forth. Then a neighboring farmer offers that landowner, more money because they know that the previous farmer was essentially banking nutrients with their cover crops. And from a strictly financial economic scale, there's absolute truth in that. There may be 20, 30, 40, 50, even $100 an acre of banked nutrients in there that if they go in, they till it up, those nutrients are quickly released and they can afford to offer $50 an acre more. And a landowner who may be in another state, well, hey, that's all profit to them. Why not? So this is where some of the, I guess you'd say, tensions arise, or I could say opportunities arise, and making sure we're trying to match up the right farmer with the right landowner. So just going to the next slide, I'm going to lay out a few things here of how we can overcome some of these gulfs of differences here between landowners and farmers, especially if you have a landowner who really wants to find a farmer who shares their values and their goals. So identify common ground is it's just simple things that these things apply to many things in life actually, but it's a nice almost a pun there, identify common ground with what we're talking about. What are the shared goals? No one's going to argue that increasing your organic matter is bad. So there's something that anybody could agree on. Less soil erosion, we can agree on that. More resilient soils, that's becoming more of a fact as the years go by. When we take care of our soils, we have cover crop, high organic matter, more resilient to drought, more resilient even to wet conditions sometimes. And I would even argue we're in a heat wave right now here in the Mid-Atlantic region, more resilient soils. Not that it's a difference of day and night, but just a 5 or 10% difference sometimes can be significant. And the other thing too, and this is maybe more an auxiliary point, but controlling herbicide resistant weeds. We can do that with planting cereal rye before soybeans. It's just a quick example of that. And then the next slide goes on and talks about, do cover crops pay? And this is where some of the questions come in, because yes, it costs more to buy the cover crops, to plant them. So the landlord may be interested in helping with the seed or establishment cost. And I would say too, a long-term lease is highly recommended. And it's kind of the example that I said previously why this is, because it takes time to build up your soil health. You don't just get increased soil health by 1 year or one cycle of the season and so forth. So if you're a landowner and you might want to help defray some of those additional costs if you really want your soil to be healthy, or better yet, if you have a good farmer, go for a long-term lease. And I think Sarah's going to talk a little about this more later, but that's just something that I would highly recommend. Number 2 is to try to show the value. If you go to the next slide, show the value of what we're trying to do here with soil health. The landowner needs to be convinced of the value. So if you're a farmer who wants to farm in a soil health methods, and your landowner is a little skeptical, you need to show them the soil. Get a shovel out there and show them the soil, the difference between where it's cover cropped and where it's not. You know what you're looking for, it's not too hard to do. Look for earthworm activity. Show a comparison if possible. Seeing is believing. Explain the biological process. And I'm not going to get too technical here today, but again, this is kind of speaking from the farmer's side. If you work with farmers, this is a good way to help them to be able to communicate with their landlord. And then moving on to number 3, effective communication is, I think, really paramount to understand. And this goes both ways here. Communicate throughout the year, not just once a year. I know, again, I'm going to say there's all kinds of relationships that are out there, and you have to be prudent to what kind of relationship the farmer has with the landowner and vice versa. Explain why you want soil health practices. Take advantage of a teachable moment. After a heavy rain, while it's still raining, and I do this, I just did this a couple weeks ago. We had a downpour here. My wife and I went out and we drove around the community, and we're taking videos out of the car as the thunder and lightning still there and it's pouring down rain, just showing the differences of different management techniques. I actually have a video, I didn't get to show my Amish neighbor yet, of some of his fields where he started no-till. He just started no-till, like just this year. He's a farmer who told me 5 years ago, I just like to plow. But he started to no-till, and I don't think he actually saw the difference in his field because he wasn't out there when it was raining. But I took a video, and I'm going to show you the difference between where he tilled and where he didn't till. And that's just an example of what you can do to kind of, like, in a sense, prove your point. Controlling herbicide resistant weeds. I mentioned that before. We know that using cover crops can definitely help with that. Now, if you're a landowner, you got to respect a farmer's time. And I think most people understand that, but when farmers are busy, farmers are busy. You know the adage, make hay when the sun shines. It's not that they're always making hay all the time, but you know, I'm speaking as a farmer here. When I got stuff to do and there's only a certain amount of time to do it in, don't come and visit me then, because I won't be in the mood to talk. So try to, you know, a rainy day or on the off season, knowing when that farmer may or may not be busy. Just respect the farmer's time. I think that's really, really important to understand. Number 4 then is follow-up. And again, these points are geared to both the farmer side and the landowner side. If there's questions come up, answer those questions. Make a point to keep the cover crop soil health discussion active. And again, as appropriate. And you would know who you're dealing with, their personality. Have they shown to be curious? or you got to kind of be, kind of careful what you say, when you say it, and so forth. I would even suggest for landowners, if they have an opportunity, to go to a farmer meeting, go to a field day, and see what farmers are talking about in this topic here. It's could be very insightful. Number 5 then is maybe kind of a special category with absentee landlords. They may be from another state. They just may never see their farm, maybe sometimes for years. It's just an investment. It's out there. They may trust the farmer they're working with, or they may even have hired a farm manager just to make sure it gets done. But I would still say, with the technology we have today, pictures, phone, email, whatever, just let them know what's going on, show them what's going on in both dynamics of that. So the last thing I want to say about absentee landlords or landowners is to, if there's anything appropriate, articles that come out and links to them articles or whatever, pass them on, share them, let them know what's happening. So kind of builds the trust that's not just you, whoever you represent, that is trying to promote this. There's actually some backing to that. Explaining the merits of cover crops, the merits of not tilling the soil, some of the benefits that cover crops are for farmers, reducing inputs and so forth. So, I guess one more slide, but if there's any questions that you guys have, I want to spend a couple minutes here with questions. I really left enough time because I wanted to make sure we have time. I will just say quick, if you want to back up a second, soil health is our future. This picture has meaning to me. This is me showing my granddaughter her first earthworm, and just the inquisitiveness of a little 2-year-old, just to see that little squiggly little earthworm. Obviously, she doesn't understand all the dynamics, but this is why we're trying to farm this way. We need to have good food produced for the future generations. We need to keep the soil. We need to be a good steward of it. And this is something that doesn't always get talked about, but it's a reality. We don't think in terms of the future 100 years from now. Most of us think pretty much year to year, right? But how would it change our perception of either the land we own or the way we farm it if we're thinking about our great grandchildren or the future generations? Is this field still going to be productive to produce food? I think that is something I would like to throw out there as kind of a challenge to keep in the back of your mind when we're thinking about these issues. And then my final slide is just a little promotion of the book I wrote, The Futureproof Farm. This is not a how to grow cover crop type book. This is more about big picture things, changing mindset in a changing world. Some of the stories that I have collected from my travels around the world and so forth. You can look at that at stevegroff.com. But so I'll just open it up now for any questions, and we can just chat about what questions you might have.
Thank you, Steve, for the overview there of soil health. I have one to start while people are thinking of their questions. In terms of how long does it take to see a return to soil health, depending on your management?
Yeah, it's not going to be a straight up answer there, Jen. You can see results in 1 year. You may not see results for 5 years. And I'm sorry, it's not more specific, but I'll just say that knowing what I know now, I could have probably transitioned my farm. Well, I know I could have transitioned it much quicker. So every farmer has a knowledge base, a management ability from their own experience and so forth. So that is a huge factor in how fast you can make a difference. So there's not a clear-cut answer to that. I'm more excited about a farmer who is moving in the right direction, not so much how fast they're moving. So, if someone's moving in the right direction, good for them. That's to be commended. So I liken this to, I use this analogy. getting into this whole system of soil health is like going from being a nurse to a surgeon. There's a lot more involved. And most of that is, it's not that it's the sheer unknown or technical, and this is where that analogy breaks down. It's just the experience. See, farmers only get one chance every year for most of their practices. And then you wait a year and then you tweak it, try something else, you talk to other farmers and you get experience. And the other thing is what might work in my farm may not work on another farm not too far away. So zeroing in and working on your farm is the best. Here's one more thing I'll say to that, Jen. The best scenario is to tap into a farm that's close by, a farmer who's doing what you want to accomplish. If you have someone in your local vicinity, that will be the fastest way to make the most gains. Not everybody has that, but that would be my advice for any farmer or anybody working with farmers, to link them up with farmers who are doing what that farmer wants to accomplish.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So one thought about working with absentee landowners, maybe where it's hard to invite them out to the farm. Would you recommend taking videos of your farm operations to share with the landlord, or have you heard of anything that other people do, some creative ideas for how to share what's going on?
Yeah, and that's easy to do nowadays. All our phones have videos on, video capability, pictures, whatever you can that you think is meaningful. And this is where you got to know your audience. You got to know your absentee landowner. I mean, what is significant to them? Don't be filling up their their text or their whatever you communicate with stuff that they don't even care about, or it's too technical. They just don't understand. So you got to know where they're at. Be just prudent in that and so forth. So I think absentee is one of the hardest ones, probably simply because of usually there's distance involved and you don't get to see face to face, but you just communicate as much as possible as appropriate.
Sounds good. See, do we have any other questions that anyone has for Steve?
I have one little quick story from a friend of mine, Dave Brandt. Some of you know him out in Ohio. He had, and this kind of goes into the scenario I talked about here. One of his landowners approached him and said, hey, another neighbor offered me, I forget what it was, $40 or $50 an acre more rent for that land that he had been farming. And Dave said, well, he's going to till that up and he's going to ruin what I've built up the last couple of years. And the guy said, well, can you match his, he said, can you match his price? And Dave said, hey, come out here, I want to show you something. So he got him, he went over to his place, took him out in the field with a shovel, started digging in this guy's, the owner's, his field, showed him the earthworms, explaining all this stuff. And the guy, it basically convinced him to, okay, I want to stick with Dave. And then Dave said they had wheat in at least some of those fields. And after the wheat was harvested, he planted a multi-species mix of cover crops that included sunflowers and a bunch of things. He said when those sunflowers started blooming, he said he got a fresh bouquet of sunflowers every Monday morning. He said, I personally delivered it to him. And the guy was like, wow, that's so cool what you're doing. And so that was a form of communication where he took a landowner who was basically, let's just say skeptical, just didn't see the value of what was going on. And that's just a classic story of the educational side of this. And I'm not saying that's going to work every time, but it worked in that case. So might be something out there for an idea for someone to do at some point.
Perfect. I've heard that story and I think that's great too. So we do have a question in the chat from Anne. She says, I'm a small landowner who has just taken over the management of a 30-acre farm that has been farmed by the same family for decades and 3 generations. They rotate corn and soybeans over the years. The soil health has degraded and we're starting to see serious erosion. They tried no-till for 1 season and were not happy with the results and resumed their traditional practices. What are some incentives I could try to encourage another attempt?
Well, there needs to be some education here of how no-till works. No-till is simply not just parking the tillage equipment. It's much, much more than that. So that's my first, off the cuff remark. Trying to get cover crops planted in there. Can we get wheat in the rotation? These are just some simple things that make no-till work better. The first year of no-till is generally the hardest in most situations for people who don't know what they're doing. Sometimes you need a plan to go no-till 2 years in advance, depending on the situation. You need to set yourself up for success. No-till is a strategy. It's a management. It's way more than buying a no-till plant or not tilling. That's what so many, I'll say, rookie mistakes that are out there. Getting cover crops planted, and if you're in Maryland, there's no excuse. They pay you very well for that aspect of it. In some other areas, there's funding out there. So there needs to be a little bit of education there, and in understanding how this works for whoever's doing the farming there. I hear this all the time. Yep, I tried no-till, it don't work. I've had quite a few people now over the years come back to me later and say they figured it out, because now it's no-till cover crop soil health is, I'm not saying it's mainstream, but we got momentum on our side. Clearly, we have global momentum on our side. And the excuses of no-till won't work, cover crops won't work, is starting to get a little more nil, I'll say. So enough people are making it work. And the people who are making it work are the people who study it, learn for themselves, start trying, and so forth. So sometimes I retort to his questions. I've said, yep, it didn't work. That's true. It didn't work. But why didn't it work? Then we start asking questions. And I think there's probably something there we could figure out.
I can't believe I did that. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I think that about wraps up your time. I know that you've got things to do in the field, so Steve, thank you so much.
Appreciate being on again, and thanks to all who are organizing this and those who are attending. Let's go out and make a difference.
Yep. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Jen. And if any of you are interested in seeing some of the techniques that Steve was just talking about in person, Steve is part of a great farmer-led organization called the PA No-Till Alliance. They have some field days coming up in later July, and I think Lisa will be covering that, the dates and all that. If not, we'll get you those dates, but it's just an excellent way for you to see some of this stuff in action. Okay, so with that, thank you, Steve. Get back out there, and we'll turn it over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Lamont. Sorry, my slides were going a little crazy there. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Everhart. I work for the Agricultural Law Education Initiative. Recognize a few of the folks who've tuned in today, but if you're unfamiliar with ALEI, we are a multi-institutional program made up of folks from attorneys who work at College Park, attorneys who work at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, and then myself and my colleague, Margaret Todd, at the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. Our job is to provide legal education and resources across the state. So I've given you our website here. It's unaglaw.org. If you've never checked out our website, I encourage you to do so. We have a variety of legal resources, and we're always very receptive to hearing about any ideas you have for additional resources that we could add. All right, so I'm here to talk about some tools for landowners. Just to kind of give you a bit of an overview, approximately 40% of farmland, both within the state of Maryland, where I work, and also nationwide, is leased. So just to kind of give you a perspective of how much land we're talking about here when we're talking about conservation practices on leased acres. There's a lot of reasons why conservation practices are less prevalent on leased acres, and there's some sophisticated academic scholarship. There's a lot of surveys and interviews that have gone on across the country. I'm just going to boil it down to three main reasons today. Communication. lack thereof, really. So, Steve led things off in a great way about communication. So I'm not going to talk too much about communication, but I agree with him 100%. Communication has to be open between the landowner and the tenant in order for conservation practices to be put on leased acres. Leasing uncertainty is a big part of the problem. So if you're farming on a handshake, I know the person who asked the question before said she's had multi-generations of the same family farming her land. There can be a lot of trust there, generational trust and an understanding, but we see it time and time again, both with parties who are new to working with each other and even people that have worked together for generations. If there's not a written lease giving the farmer assurance that they're going to be there for, at least a few years, like we said, these conservation practices don't turn on a dime, and that uncertainty on the part of the farmer, it's really going to reduce the likelihood that conservation practices are going to be put into place on the land. Knowledge deficit, I think, is the last, sort of big category. And by that, I mean knowledge deficit on the part of the landowner about agriculture and about the conservation practices. So, there's a couple different ways that this can be approached. One way that I encourage people to, to kind of attack this part of the challenge is utilize those agricultural service providers in your area. So I see that we've got quite a few folks from soil conservation districts here with us today. They know, that's their job. They're public servants. They are available to help landowners and farmers through this process. Sometimes we find landowners are hesitant to, to talk to their farmers about these things. And maybe farmers don't necessarily have the time, like Steve was saying, or really understand what the landowners know and don't know. So one way to bridge that gap is to, seek some help from extension, from soil conservation people. Sometimes a three-way conversation can be really helpful there and provide some assistance on that knowledge gap. One thing that we did to try to assist landowners and farmers through this process is we created this agricultural conservation leasing guide. So this, we were able to do this. I did this ALEI in partnership with the Hughes Center for Agroecology and with the support of a grant from SARE, which is the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education Program. And it's available on the landownerhelp.com website, along with some other really helpful leasing resources. So if you're looking for resources to help you form a lease, I think this is a really good one. We've also got general leasing resources on the ALEI website, that umaglot.org. We tried to structure this resource to help both the farmer and the landowner. So we started really basic with the who. We were getting information that we were getting new landowners who were walking into soil conservation districts or extension offices and saying, I just bought some farmland. I'm really excited about this. I have no idea where to start. I don't know how. I want it to be farmed right. And I don't even know where to begin. So we started with the who and explained some of that background information, what roles the different agencies play in the process. Then we moved on to the what. So how can you use a lease to support farm conservation? And we included some communication strategies in there as well. And then, you can't stop without the how. So there's sample lease language to support these specific practices, because our hope is that if you have a simple farm lease, I don't think farm leases need to be complicated. They shouldn't have words in them that aren't easily understandable. There's no magic legal words that have to be in a lease. Should be in plain English, should be something simple that both parties understand. But you should reference conservation in the lease if that's something that's important to both of you. So these are the different parts of the process. Communicating, like Steve gave us a good background in, considering the lease term, setting some farming standards, addressing the specific practices that are in place, considering the costs involved in compensation, and then agreeing to review and revise. A lease is a living document. All the time, we see folks and we try to help folks, and I say, do you have a lease? They say, yeah, I do have a lease. I'm like, well, that's great, because we deal with a lot of folks who are still doing this on a handshake, and they hand me a lease from 1992 that they've just been continuing to honor. It's a lease, but I doubt that that lease is really reflective of what's actually going on in that farm at that time. So, sometimes I find people seem hesitant about renewing or revising, amending a legal document, they think, oh, that thing was a headache to put together. I'm done with that. I don't want to think about that. But you got to think about it as something that it's really only going to work for both parties if it's accurate and if it's actually a reflection of what's currently going on. So I'm not going to talk about communication because Steve did that. If you want some more communication strategies, check out the Conservation Leasing Guide. A couple words about length of lease. Short leases discourage conservation practices. Full stop. I think this is something that everybody can agree on. This is something that we have found that landowners might not necessarily think about. And so I think it's extremely important to start with it and just sort of lay it out there. You know, you got to put yourself in the shoes of the landowner. If you're a farmer or if you're an ag service provider working with farmers, landowners are just not thinking about, you know, what a 5-year lease, what that would mean to that farmer and what they'd be willing to do on a farm with a farm-year lease versus a handshake. So important to start with that in terms of working with landowners. We talked about conservation practices take time. So if you want to support a farmer with these endeavors, you got to give them the time and you got to give the practice the time to actually show the results. Setting standards. So this we have found to be very popular. So we rolled out the Agricultural Conservation Leasing Guide in Maryland with a series of workshops, specifically train the trainer workshops for ag service providers. Those ag service providers then went out in their parts of the state and were able to work with farmers and landowners. That was very effective because of the ag service providers. I give them 100% of the credit. They have the trusted relationships. People feel comfortable having them come onto the farm and have these conversations. Setting minimal standards is really important. So, you know, with a legal document, you have to sort of think about the worst case scenario. Lawyers are good at doing that. Sometimes farmers and landowners need some help with that. But, you know, if you're a landowner and you have an expectation of how you want that farm to be farmed, put it in the lease. Doesn't have to be complicated, but put it in the lease. Talk to the farmer about it. Make sure you guys are on the same page or in agreement, and then put it in the lease. It's going to protect both parties. Sometimes we find farmers are hesitant to make their leases specific, or that, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They don't want to go here. But I can tell you that avoiding legal conflict is best for both parties. Nobody wants to end up in a conflict. And one of our main motivations for this whole project and for helping landowners and farmers with this is to preserve that leasing relationship. We want farmers and landowners to continue to work together. So if you have an expectation, just put it in the lease. This is one example of how you can do it. You can reference best practices from either your state Department of Agriculture or your specific county soil conservation district. Another example here at the bottom is one we have found to be pretty popular. You simply reference the farm's conservation plan. It's a customized plan specifically for that farm. Most of the time there's an understanding that a farmer is going to be adhering to that plan, referencing that plan. So if you have that expectation, put that standard in the lease. When you're talking about addressing specific practices in a lease, important when you're working with a landowner, and especially a landowner who's on that knowledge deficit side, who doesn't have a strong base of knowledge about these practices, don't just throw words in the lease that the landowner might not understand. Take the time to explain it and define the practice. Think from the landowner side, you might be tuning in here today or hear about something, read an article, what have you, might have the idea that you want your farmer to adopt this practice, and that may or may not work for that particular farm. Take a minute to talk to the farmer about it. Does the farmer have the necessary equipment? Is this going to have to be something gradual that happens over time? So if we're talking about conservation tillage, it might not be feasible for that farmer to go no-till right at the beginning. We might have to have some reduced tillage while we're phasing it in. What is this going to mean for the farmer? If you're asking that farmer to change their practices, are there going to be disease, weed maintenance challenges? What are going to be the long-term implications of this for the farmer's operation? Here's an example, and these are all just, sort of food for thought. These are for you to consider. You can take it to your individual attorney and get some legal advice. But we tried to make these flexible for folks. So, we left to fill in the blank here about the amount of residue cover that you're asking the farmer to leave on the surface. But if this is an expectation, if you expect your farmer to be farming in this way, good idea to address it in the lease. One thing we heard time and time again when we talk to farmers about this is that landowners who have initiated this, some landowners who have initiated this with their farmers, the farmers are not really interested in it because they end up having costs. So the farmers end up having to put more money into the land, or they're having yield or profit losses. There's maintenance responsibilities. And these are probably things that the landowner is not even thinking about at the time. So important to address these costs in the lease. Don't just ignore them. Make sure you talk to the farmer about, hey, if we make this change, if we install this practice, what is it going to mean for you? And how can we make it equitable? You can discount rent. You can share program payments. That's something that's going to take a little bit of work, but talk to your local soil conservation district folks, NRCS folks, about how that can be done. If you don't have any money to share, think about a longer term lease. That can be something of value that a landowner could potentially give. And then don't forget about the tax implications. So we do have publications about this on the conservation leasing website. Happy to talk more about that at a different time, but cost share, program payments, in some instances are considered income. So just make sure, especially landowners that are unfamiliar with farming and those benefits, nobody wants an unintended tax bill. So these are just some compensation options, ways that you can share a program payment or gradually reduce rent over time. All of these are in the leasing guide, but just don't forget about those extra costs. Troubleshooting, I'll wrap it up here. This is not for everyone, but if you've got some real serious soil fertility issues, if you're concerned about your nutrient levels and you think you want to take a look at soil samples, you're either going to have to give yourself the right to inspect the property in the lease, or you're going to have to, make sure that the farmer is sharing those soil samples that he or she is taking with you. All of that should be in the lease if that's something that's right for the two of you. Sharing the nutrient management plan. In Maryland, we've got mandatory nutrient management planning, and the landowners are not going to be able to get a copy of that unless that's officially in the lease. And then agree to meet and annually verify practices. So like I said, these things are living. You're going to want to take a look every year, what's going on the farm. Is this practice still make sense? Do we need to think about some other practices? So like Steve was saying, in the off season, take a walk with the landowner, give that landowner a call, and verify that the lease still reflects what you've got going on the farm. All right, and with that, there's my contact information, and I will hand it over to Lisa.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Let me share my screen. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be wrapping up the program today, but please continue to put any questions into the Q&A as we're going along here. My name is Lisa Blazure. I'm a co-worker with Lamont at Stroud Water Research Center, and I serve as the soil health coordinator for both Stroud and a statewide organization, the Pennsylvania Soil Health Coalition. So I'll touch on a little bit about that, but really this last part of today's sessions is going to provide you with some resources and links to dive a little deeper into these topics. So first and foremost, this webinar coincides with the public launch of this new website that was developed as part of this project, landownerhelp.com. I really encourage you to visit this website. Sarah and Steve last summer did a wonderful 3-part webinar series that dives deeper into these overview topics that they've presented on today. So the recordings from those webinars from last summer are housed on this website. There are links to the University of Maryland's leasing guide that you can access directly from this website as well. So this would be a great Mid-Atlantic specific resource for you from the landowner side of it to really get an understanding for these topics and provide some good links for you. So as Steve mentioned or suggested in his talk, if the landowners, if you have the opportunity to attend a field day to be able to learn more about these practices, and we realize that that may not be possible, with people's working schedules or if you're living out of the area. But one similar thing that you can do remotely on the Pennsylvania Soil Health Coalition website, it's pasoilhealth.org. Under our resources tabs, we have about 31 farmer testimonials. So if you have some time, they're usually just a couple minutes, video productions from the farmer's perspective on why conservation is important to them, what benefits and gains they've seen from implementing these practices. So it would be a great resource for you to start to getting understanding on why other farmers view these conservation practices as important. It can give you some insight into having that conversation with your tenant farmer. And then also just helps you kind of learn the lingo, learn that the terminology that the farmers use to be able to have that fluent conversation with the farmers about these practices. Another thing that's on the coalition website page is some great resources, particularly for cover crops. There's a whole series of Penn State Extension videos that are listed there, plus some other links to other websites, resources from other government organizations, private sector folks that have put together these cover crop programs. The other component too, beyond just the resource page, each of these member organizations, Lamont mentioned that Steve was part of an organization called the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. There are going to be links to those other member organizations of this coalition, and each of those member organizations are going to have their own resources on their website. So that's an overview of a quick one-stop shop for Pennsylvania resources. Virginia also has a soil health coalition. Mary Sketch is their coordinator, and her email address is listed there. So if you just Google Virginia Soil Health Coalition, their website would come up. They also have a resources tab. And one thing that's pretty unique that they have is this interactive farm graphic that you can click on different elements around the farm and learn about those practices, learn about how implementing certain practices can improve soil health, protect soil erosion, and reduce that nutrient runoff loss. So that's a wonderful resource, even if you're outside of Virginia, to tap into. Sarah mentioned a lot of the resources available through the University Law site, but there are also some state and non-government organizations within the state of Maryland. So Maryland has a 1 Million Acre Challenge group, and the goal is to have 1 million acres of farmland in Maryland by the year 2030 that are implementing soil health practices. So Amanda is the program director for that. You can Google that website. And then Maryland in the Mid-Atlantic region is very unique in that they are the only state that has passed actual legislation establishing a healthy soils program. They have a coordinator for that program. Kevin's information is listed there at the bottom of the page. And the University of Maryland Department of Ag is another great resource for Maryland. And as I'm rattling off all of these resources, Jen Nelson can put into the chat box for you. I've got links directly to all of these websites that I've presented here today. So on a broader national scale, this would also apply to the state of Delaware, because right now the state of Delaware does not have a cohesive state soil health program. So they are overlapping with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service has information for state of Delaware, but then also the Sussex County Conservation District website has a soil health page and some videos and farmer testimonials for Delaware farmers as well. But NRCS has for, half a decade now, really developed some good materials that they market under this tagline of unlock the secrets in the soil. So there are lots of 1 or 2 page fact sheets, simple information all the way to some more detailed information. But if you're looking for some simple 1 or 2 pages to share with a tenant farmer to kind of introduce these concepts, I would definitely recommend visiting that NRCS Unlock the Secret to the Soil. And I threw this example up here just because this is a document that's specifically geared towards landowners. And it's 5 questions that landowners should ask their farmers about soil health. So that's a great starting point for you to be thinking about these conversations and how to broach that subject. And then also on a broader national level, there's been a lot of work happening with American Farmland Trust in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and the Trust in Food. So they've also been surveying non-operating landowners, trying to identify what the challenges are with getting more conservation practices adopted on their agricultural lands. Also what perhaps would be the farmer's hesitancy for adopting more practices. So American Farmland Trust has under their special collections tab, several documents for non-operating landowners. That would be a great resource. And then this Trust in Food website also has conversation starters. So there's some shorter video segments about how to start that conversation between the landowner and the tenant farmer. And they also have some legal leasing guide information, some legal language that you can consider, and some templates for leases on that website as well. So, you know, this is a really growing interest. We see the need, we see the opportunity for non-operating landowners to get engaged in conservation and to be part of this conversation and part of the solution that we're working towards these environmental goals, not just within the Chesapeake Bay for reducing sediment and nutrient runoff, but really this is a national conversation to be happening and a national concern that we have. And we realize how critical these landowners are to this forward momentum of regenerative agriculture and protecting those precious resources and our local waterways. So that's a real quick overview of some additional resources that would be available to you as a follow-up to this webinar. So that's what I've got. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, Lamont, and throw that back to you now.
Okay, let's see. So I will, we had a couple of questions that came through in the Q&A. And so one Sarah answered, but I wanted to bring it to everybody's attention because I think it's probably a pretty common question. And so without a formal agreement in place with a farmer, someone was wondering how to calculate a leasing rate. So was asking if he could be pointed in the direction to determine how much the land could be leased per acre. And Sarah posted a couple of links that I'll go ahead and put in the chat as well. One that was a blog post related to the Delaware and Maryland cash rental rate, and the other one for Pennsylvania. And so another question that had come in though, I think, Lisa, you can answer this one. Does Stroud do tours?
And Lamont, so quick answer is yes, absolutely, we do tours. We've got a beautiful campus in Chester County with a exceptional value stream going through it. So on a regular basis, we've got field days scheduled to talk about the importance of forested riparian buffers, but then also on the property is some agricultural demonstration areas where we've got different best management practices. So we can very easily tie in multiple aspects of that conversation, highlighting both some agricultural practices that we have on the property, as well as the importance of forested riparian buffers. And Lamont, I'll give you the opportunity to add to that, you know, based on some past tours that maybe you've been involved with the organization.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, Lisa's right. We would love to have you join us. And if you are from an area, or if you say work with a conservation district or an NRCS office and you want to actually bring a group to Stroud, we can usually accommodate that. So one way to start the planning for that is you could just reach out to me, and I'll put my email in the chat box, and we can figure out a date and how to get you there and what we can show you. But we'd love to have you. Thanks.
Just as a side note there, when we first started some of these projects and I was able to come out to the Stroud Center, I've been to a lot of soil health tours and events and workshops and things. And there, you guys, I would say, have kind of a unique set of information and projects that you're working on that makes it sort of worth the effort to put something together. You present information in a unique way. And so I would highly recommend it. You guys are doing a lot of very cool work there. So let's see. So we have tackled the items that are in the Q&A box so far. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to put those in there while we have just a couple of minutes left. And the one thing that I wanted to do, I know that people have mentioned several resources and most of them are listed on landownerhelp.com. But if you are aware of any other resources that we haven't included that would be helpful from a landowner perspective related to soil health, feel free to get in contact with any one of us, and we'd be happy to add some additional things just to make the website that much more useful. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lamont to wrap us up for the day.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Jen, and thank you all out in our audience for joining us today. I want to put a special shout out to Matt Steinruck from Big Picture Studios, who I think is in the audience today. Matt has designed this new Landowner Help website with us, and he is excellent. And I'll just encourage any of you, if there's additional information that you really think ought to be on there that would help farmers and landowners or conservation professionals, just shoot me an email and Matt can get that information up on the website the next day. So Matt, thank you for all your work behind the scenes, giving us a really great platform to communicate with the ag community on this. And so yes, with that, we'll wrap up the webinar. If you wanted to take a look at it again, should be posted on landownerhelp.com in another week or two. So just visit that. We may just send out a note to everyone via email, let you know that it's posted. And good luck with all of your conversations that you're having in your home areas around conservation, soil health, and farm productivity. So great, have a great day and stay cool, everyone. Bye.